Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you, and I truly do mean this. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Chris of the Chris and Christine Show podcast. You can find that on the old interweb if you decide to look that up at chrisandchristineshow.com. Now, I created that podcast all by myself. Yeah, check that out. I got the shovel out and it broke ground all by myself using Google Sites. Google Sites is a free, easy way to create a podcast website or any kind of website, really. You can design it. It's all got templates out there ready to go, easy peasy, at chrisandchristineshow.com. So today, what I'm going to talk about is the big elephant in the room in podcasting that happened over the last week or so, and that is you can make a ton of money by charging your guest to be on your show. Now, how much money are we talking about? I'll tell you a little bit later. And my thoughts on whether or not you should charge your guest, or could you even charge your guest to be on your show in the first place. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I just want to say that this show, Podtastic Audio, the one you're listening to right now, I designed this show entirely just to help out podcasters who could not figure out which end of a microphone to use, or why does my sound on my show sound like crap, or this and that. I don't know. So people listen to the Chris and Christine Show, and we always strive to make the best sound we can for that show, whether it's a guest interview, especially guest interview, I would say, and just between the two of us, or if we have three people in the same room, or two of us, or a guest, or whatever we do. Our goal is to make sure the show sounds the best it possibly can without spending tons and tons of money on equipment and gear and studio padding and all that stuff that you can spend if you're going to do a podcast. It costs money. You go down this rabbit hole of I'm just going to start off with a $30 USB microphone and my, $400 laptop I got from Walmart, and I'm going to create a podcast. And yes, you can do that and probably sounds just fine. But then eventually you start looking at, how do I have more than one person? How do we do that in the same room with this setup? Well, I guess I really can't with this USB, so let's get an interface. So then you go down the rabbit hole of buying interfaces. And the interface that we're using is the Behringer 404 interface. Now, it does not have a ton of gain on the microphones. It's about 53 dB, I found out. To put that in comparison, the Zoom PodTrack P4, which I have, which is battery operated and very small, it has about 70 dB of gain. So a lot more. That's why I've always noticed when I use the PodTrack P4 versus this Behringer, is that the PodTrack, it also has little finger knobs to adjust the gain, just like the Behringer does. But the PodTrack, I have to crank it down, and the Behringer, I got to crank it up because it's like blasting your ears so much louder than it is on the Behringer, because it's got not much. The gain is not quite as high as the PodTrack. Now the Rodecaster Pro 2, I believe it's at 75 or something dB of gain, which is powerful enough to run big, gain-hungry microphones without a cloud lifter. Now you're probably thinking, hey, Chris, what's a cloud lifter? Okay, well, cloud lifter is basically think of it like an amplifier for your microphone to go to your interface, to boost the microphone level signal up without bringing up all that hiss and hissing sound in with the signal. So it cleans that out, boosts up your mic volume, gives you an extra 20 dB of gain added to whatever your interface already comes with. So say I've got 53 dB of gain on this interface, and then I add a cloud lifter. So we're looking at maybe getting me up to 70 dB of gain, which I could probably use for a Shure SM7B microphone or any of those kind of microphones that require a lot of gain to make that happen. Now, all of these things, you can boost things in post-production. That's kind of what we do here. Is that our levels aren't extremely loud as we record, but we always boost them later in post. Now, getting back to the topic at hand, which is all about making money with your podcast. Now, you can choose to make money or choose not to make money. Now, we've made a little bit of money on the Chris and Christine show. When I say a little bit, I mean barely enough to pay for the hosting for the podcast. I mean, it's like nothing really. But in this show on Podtastic Audio, I'm not interested in making any money for this podcast. In fact, this podcast is hosted for free on Anchor. So, and I don't even use their anchors like advertising, paying you, monetization platform they have already built into Anchor. I don't mess with that stuff. I don't care about any of that stuff. The reason why I use Anchor in the first place is, first off, a couple things really. One, chances are, if you're starting out as a new podcast, there's a good chance you're on Anchor right now, or you're starting out a podcast on Anchor. I would recommend doing it just to test the waters out to see if you like it. This show is completely hosted on Anchor, so it gives you an idea what it could sound like. In fact, where you host really doesn't matter what your show sounds like. It's how you actually recorded the MP3 in the first place. And the second reason, obviously, is because Anchor is free to host. I'm not paying them anything to host on Anchor. So that's like a win-win. So if you think about the average cost to host a show for a podcast host, what is it, like $20, $15-ish, So in theory, because I don't pay for Anchor, I'm actually making $15 every single episode. Well, check that out. Okay, so to get back to the topic at hand here, this is all according to Bloomberg, which, if you've heard of Bloomberg, they do like news articles and money stuff and things like that. So they just ran an article they posted like last week or whenever it was. And basically the headline says this. It says, podcast guests are paying up to $50,000 to appear on popular shows. Now that's $50,000 for one appearance on one show. Now I know that $50,000, it is a lot of money. Some of you may only make that an entire year's salary, $50,000. So the host charges the guest to be on their show. Now, after doing a little research, they are not the only ones that do this. There's lots of other shows that do charge for a guest to be on that show. And the door swings both ways. There are guests that will charge the podcast to be on their show. The example they put in here is Manny Pacquiao. He is a boxer. If you remember a few years back, he fought, Floyd Mayweather. And but the point is that he charges the podcaster $15,000 for an appearance. Now, I can only imagine that he's not the only one that actually does this. Now, is it ethical to actually charge your guest to be on your show? Is it ethical for somebody charged to be on their show? I think the thing that really makes a big difference is what you're doing is when you're paying a podcaster, say, hey, I have a product or a book or something, and I want to be on your show to promote my said thing. The podcaster that does charge for you to be on their show, what you're really paying for is their size of their audience. And if they have a big enough audience, they can warrant a big enough charge. The example they give about the $50,000 ticket price to be on a show, that particular show gets like millions and millions of downloads per episode. So $50,000, and they say they only do it for 1% of the guests actually pay that. Now, some other podcast shows charge anywhere from $3,500 per guest on the lower end to like $20,000 or $40,000 per appearance on their show. Now, if you're going to charge somebody to be on your show, no matter what the cost is, I would say that the actual person paying the money should have access to your analytics to prove whether or not them spending even $2,000 is worth the investment going on your show. What is the return on investment? Because they're paying money to be on your show. They're going to want proof that you have a decent sized audience to warrant such a charge. Now, listen, I've said this once and I'll say it again. Your podcast is your podcast. You can do it however you want to do it. But just remember, if you're trying to monetize your podcast and you are on episode 1 of your buddies in the basement talking about Batman show and you want to try making money off this show, it takes one major key element, I would say, and that is a decent sized audience. And you really need to kind of have a few episodes under your belt to kind of see where the audience sits and if they're regularly coming back. Now, I'm not talking about you, your buddy, and your parents. Those are not like a real audience. I mean, it kind of is, but it's not an audience to where you actually need to make any kind of money. If you're looking to get advertisements for your show, like you want to run ad spots in your show, most brands want to see a minimum of about 5,000 to 10,000 downloads per episode to even consider doing an ad spot on your show. Now, when it comes back to podcast guests paying to be on podcasts, they're also going to want to see proof of downloads. Like, hey, if you're going to charge me a few $1,000s to be on your show, I want to know is how many people actually listen to your show. It's only fair, right? And on the Chris and Christine show, we have had a lot of different guests come on the show. They always either email us or we message them. Usually they come to us. Very rarely have we reached out to somebody and they've come on the show. Usually it's the other way around. They all seem to come to us. Now, we have never charged a guest to be on our show, and they've never charged us to be on their show. And frankly, I wouldn't accept the money or pay the money. The way I look at it like this, if a guest takes time to be on your show, then you have them on your show. And if they actually are a good guest and it's a really good episode, you promote it, they share it with their audience, you share it with your audience. It's like a win-win because they're getting in front of your audience. And if they have a following, you're kind of getting your show in front of their audience. So it's a double whammy. You both are getting kind of paid in some way. But there are certain circumstances for pretty much everything. Now, if you are one that is doing an interview show, and for the record, the Chris and Christine show was never supposed to be an interview show at all. It was never designed to be an interview show. We set the show up as just Christine and I having conversations about topics we looked up on the computer, like best towns to raise a family, or we talked about this new fad about meatless cheap burgers at the restaurants. Are they any good? Would you buy them? Resume tactics people are doing for their resumes, dating things, themes, and things like that. We bring up discussions, articles, and we would talk about it, just the two of us in the same room. It wasn't until like episode 30 that we actually even discovered Clean Feed. And once we discovered Clean Feed and we liked the clarity and the ease of use to record interviews, we said, oh, well, maybe we can start doing more of these. And once you start going down that rabbit hole of having interview after interview, it started becoming a little easier to do interviews. And we kind of liked doing them, and they were easier to do. We kind of got a process going and a formula going, and it all seemed to work out. And I guess the rest is history. So we kind of evolved into this interview style of a show. But interviewing is not the primal focus of the show. The show is about us and things we like to talk about. And then the guest is like a section of the show, like another segment of the show, so to speak. Now, you can always change it up. If you do interviews on your show, you can always have like just you talking about something and then a guest comes in and so on and so forth. It's okay to always mix things up. I'm always looking for new ways to mix up the show or this show, especially the Chris and Christine show. It's why I just changed the website all around. I was like, you know what? Why don't we tinker a few things, do a few things here and there that I actually can control and I actually can do that won't take a lot of time, and just see what happens. I'm always trying out new things. And by me trying out new things, it gives me the inspiration and the gas in my tank to want to keep doing this podcasting. Because after 3 years of podcasting, people start to kind of like, we've done it for a while. We're getting kind of like, let's try something different. Let's, they do pod fade after a while. And we're at, 170 something episodes or whatever we're into now. I don't even know. I haven't looked. But the point is this, is that after so many episodes, you start to get kind of like, it's the same thing over and over again. So why not spice it up and change things up a little bit? It's your show. You can do whatever you want. So when it comes to actually charging a guest, the only thing I can think of that where I would actually warrant that was that if we were running out of time to actually host all of these guest interviews we have, because I know it takes time to do that. You pay for things, either time and money. So when we're wasting all of our time interviewing people or scheduling guests or doing this kind of stuff, that we're so booked up that if we keep on getting more and more people that want to be on our show, at some point you got to say, hey, either no, I can't take you, or if we're going to spend time doing this and we are so busy doing other things with the business and everything else that we're going to have to charge you something to be on the show because we are so booked up. It's just an idea I had yesterday. Like we were getting so busy and everything that we had to decline guests. And I'm like, I feel so bad declining them. Now I'm like, well, hell, if they're really a good guest for our show, I hate to bump somebody and this kind of thing and all that. It's like, well, make it worth our while. If you're going to charge, maybe charge a small fee to be on, just because we are so busy and we're so booked up that it just makes it worth our while. But like I said, your podcast is your podcast. You can do that or not do that. Just a thought I had. I mean, just in case if you feel like you feel bad just saying no. So let me tell you a little story happened to me a little while ago. If you do not know this already, I do have a radio station. It is K2 Radio. It is on the Live 365 app. You can find that at live365.com or on the app itself, which is Live 365. And you look up K2 Radio. It is the radio station, which I've done for a little while now. I love doing it. It's pretty much on autopilot. So you're probably thinking, hey, Chris, what kind of music do you put on the radio station? Well, that's a good question. I like to put on the music that I like to listen to, which totally makes sense. So I like to listen to rock and alternative rock music. So in that wheelhouse of rock and alternative, anything from Metallica to Coldplay and everything in between, right? So that's the kind of music I have put on the radio station. And it's also got other stuff too, like clips of us from the podcast, clips of me saying things, different guests we've had on, just stuff like that. And probably maybe a week or two into the radio station, I get an email from a band, a small band, like a garage band, kind of thing. And they said, hey, we love your station. We would like the opportunity to play our music on your station. And I said, okay, well, send over what you got and I'll take a listen. Okay, great. So they sent me this big folder of music. It's like a document or a link to something. I don't know, but it had like 30 or 40 different songs they had on there. So I sampled a few of them, and it was so it was not that type of music I play on the station. It was more like a new age, kind of like a lot of drawn out female vocals, kind of like Enya a little bit, if that makes sense. And I'm like, okay, it's fine. It did sound very amateur, like it was recorded in a bedroom or something. It wasn't like at a studio or something. It was okay. It had like 30 or 40 tracks on there. So I write the guy back. I said, hey, okay, cool, thanks. Which of these songs is your favorite? Hinting that maybe I'll put one of these songs on this channel, but not all of them, of course. And they said, oh, we love all of these songs and we want all of them to be on your station. And that kind of made me furious. When I read that, I was kind of pissed off, really, because how dare you? First off, my station has legitimate bands on there and legitimate artists on the station. None of the artists on there are really up and comer garage band, bedroom band, kind of shows. They're real bands. So if I'm going to give up putting real artists on there to have your show on there, it's got to be, first off, it's got to be something similar to what I'm already playing on there. It's got to be something in the rock and alternative genre. You give me something totally out of that space, and then you say oh, we love all the songs. They're all great. We want all of them on your station. I'm like, how dare you? So I write back. I said, okay, well, we can do that. My fee is $100 per song that you give me, I'll put on the station. And they wrote back, oh, never mind. Well, it was basically the reason why I did that was not so much I can make $3,000 or whatever, 30, whatever the money would be. Not because I wanted the money. It's because I wanted them to get lost. I don't care about their band. I was trying a nice way to say, hey, okay, I'll do it, but now it's going to have to cost you to do it. And if you're spending that kind of money, they can create their own radio station and do it themselves. But because of that whole interaction, that experience, it made me think twice, thinking, wait a second, what if I create a new segment for the radio station, exclusively for the radio station, where I have people come on and they share their favorite songs or even their own songs on the station. That's where I created K2 Radio. I call it K2 Radio Sessions. Like sessions is what I call it, like a session with me, a session with their music. So what K2 Radio Sessions is where a guest will come on. We talk a little bit about them. They bring me 3 of their favorite songs, and we kind of play the songs live. We discuss them, and that entire session is about 20 to 30 minutes, give or take, depends. And I try to set them up to go off in the morning, like 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and sometime in the afternoon, like 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, twice a day for a month. So like if I did a session today, it would run a month from today, and that would be the entire session. So if you want to be on K2 Radio Sessions and bring 3 of your favorite songs to talk about and discuss, I would love to have you on the show. It's I run exactly like I do here. It's all done through Clean Feed Live and all that such thing, but it's not being aired live. It's just being recorded, and then I set it to go off on certain times of the day. Because the radio station, it's like on autopilot. It's like I put things into the program, it's plug and play, and then it automatically plays when I tell it to play, or the rest of the day, all the music is kind of being shuffled. Now, if you're really, set on making money with your podcast, you're like, I got to make money with this thing somehow. Well, first things first, you have to have a decent size audience. And I'm going to tell you a little something that we did on the Chris and Christine show. Now, for a while, we've had a Patreon, like for the longest time, but I was kind of using it incorrectly the entire time. I created a tier system of things that I knew I really couldn't even deliver on, but I put them out there, and the prices were kind of on the higher side, like $25 a month for whatever our top 3rd tier was. And then I listed a bunch of things that Christine looked at me like, hey, we can't deliver any of these things you're promising here. I said, what if someone does actually pay for it? I wouldn't mind doing whatever we listed here for $25 a month. Why not, But because the tier plan really didn't work for us and our schedule and our busy lives and trying to accommodate things, we scrapped the entire tier level system on the Patreon. We say, you know what? Scrapping it, we're getting rid of it. We're going to go back down to the basic plan. We're going to figure this thing out. So with the Patreon basic plan we have created, it lets you put things into this kind of like a feed that only your patrons get access to. So what I decided to do was I started tinkering with it. I was like, what can we put in this feed and how does it work? So the patron subscribes to your channel, I guess, whatever the minimum amount is. I think the minimum is like $5. So like $5 pledge, they call it. They get access to everything you put in that feed. Now, what can you put in the feed, right? You can put pictures, you can put links, you can put articles that you write, you could even put audio tracks of anything, really. Video, now the video you put in there, it has to be a YouTube channel. Now, I had to figure this thing out because the YouTube channel, when you put a YouTube link into your feed on YouTube itself, you can't classify it as private, because I tried that. There's 3 choices when you create a YouTube video. There's private, there's unlisted, and there's public. Now, public means anybody can see it. It's in your feed. It's everywhere, right? Private means that you are sharing it with people you email directly. So if I was going to email you directly this link, you can watch the video. That's private. Now, how am I going to put this on the Patreon feed like that? Now, you have to use it under unlisted. I guess that's the way you do it. So we put a few things on there, like our trip to Lake Arrowhead, I had as a private video on YouTube. I listed it now, it's unlisted. But if you're a patron, you get access to that. It's in the feed. Now, all those K2 radio sessions I just mentioned, all of those are also in the feed. Now, we also decided to do was, because we are kind of an interview show now, and we do like to have a lot of banter on our show before we get to the guest. Like our show is not like, hey, welcome to the Chris and Christine show. Our guest is, and we go straight in. We don't do that. We wait a while before we get to the guest, because for us, the us is the show. It's not the guest show. It's our show. The guest is a segment of the show. It's like a section. So we kind of put them towards the back half of the episode. Or, we go like 15, 20, 30 minutes before we get to the guest. And I know some people hate that. So I'm like, you know what? If you hate it so much, here's what we'll do. I will put the entire guest interview by itself as an MP3 file on the Patreon page. So if you want to pay for an actual, you want to hear just the guest and by the guest by itself, and you don't want to hear us at all, then by all means, you can pay for that. It's on the Patreon page in the feed. You pay the whatever, $5 a month or whatever it is, and you get access to all of that. So starting this week, exclusively, the interview we have that week will be on the Patreon page exclusively by itself. Unfiltered. Well, it's going to be edited, of course. It's going to be the exact same copy. That's the one in the actual show. It's just going to be an MP3 file of it standalone. Now, before you decide to actually create a Patreon and spend all kinds of money and energy on creating this entire new thing that you're thinking that your entire listeners are going to go pay for, just so you know that only 3 to 4% of your actual real audience are actually going to do anything extra as far as even writing you emails, especially paying for stuff, paying for merch, or paying for your Patreon. So give an example. If you have 100 solid core listeners to your show every single week, now for the record, that is a decent size audience, I would say. 100 dedicated people every single week listen to your show. Only 3 or 4 of them are actually ever going to do anything other than just show up and listen to your show. So I know that it can be very defeating and deflating if you have a small audience of like, say, 20 people listening and you throw out a Patreon page and you got all this stuff out there, you're thinking you're going to start rolling in the dough because the bigger name shows are also showing that they are rolling in the dough, but they also, don't forget, they got like millions of downloads. So 3% of 1 million downloads is what, like 30,000? It's a big number, right? So if you have only 20 listeners, 3% of that is 0.6. It's just above half of one person is actually going to do anything. So don't be surprised if you don't get a lot of income from a Patreon page if you have a fairly small audience. And we realize that. So we're not really expecting to quit our jobs over a measly $5-6 that comes in. But it does serve a purpose and it fills a void for those who really want to listen to exclusive stuff that they can't get on a regular feed. And that's the thing too with a Patreon, is that if you're creating a Patreon show, figure out a way about something that you can't give away for free that people are probably going to want to listen to or experience that is not part of your regular show. Or it's in addition to your show that's hidden behind a paywall. And they said, don't be surprised if you don't get a ton of people paying. And don't get discouraged either, because that's just the way the numbers are. But that's what I always say, man. Have fun with your show. Enjoy doing it. I like doing this. I don't have to get paid doing this. I don't even care if I make money podcasting or not. I don't look at it like, I want to make money podcasting. In fact, you don't make money with your podcast. You make money from your podcast. What does that mean, Chris? Well, basically what it means is that, like, if you have, say, like for us, for example, we have the wedding business, right? And if we wanted to, which you kind of have created an ad for the Chris and Christine show, we created an ad for our own company that we advertise on our podcast. In fact, on our podcast, we talk about the weddings and the wedding experiences that we do and we host. So we talk about our business on our podcast. Now, the podcast is kind of like driving the business. The business is what makes the money, not the podcast. And there's lots of different ways to view success for a podcast. For some people, it could be, I have a gabillion, trillion downloads, and that's my version of success. Another person's version of success could be like, I got a chance to talk to X celebrity, whoever it could possibly be. And I know that you would never talk to them in any other form at all. The fact that you have a podcast, you got a chance to talk to them, that's your version of success. For somebody else, it could be like, hey, I actually got to help somebody, and that person reached back to me and said, hey, thank you so much for helping me. What you said really inspired me, and I really appreciate it. Remember that you may not think this, but to somebody out there listening, you are a celebrity to them. Like, you're their hero. Don't disappoint. And as I look at the clock right now, I'm like, oh, crap, I got to go to work. Actually, speaking of making money, I do have a regular job to get to, and I realize I'm coming up to the wire as far as time goes. Well, this has been so much fun talking about money in your podcast and all that fantastic stuff. So if you have any questions about your podcast or anything you want to talk about, you always can hit me up at podtasticaudio@gmail.com. Of course, if you go to all my social media, it's under Podtastic Audio. You hit me up in all those fantastic places. And if you want to be a guest on K2 Radio and talk all about your podcast and maybe your favorite songs or whatever, or even on here, I am welcoming anybody that wants to come on. And guess what? It's not going to cost you a thing other than your time to do it. That's it. So it's a win-win for everybody. Now, until next time, you keep on making your fantastic podcast with your amazing audio, and I'll catch you next week.